quality okay? Sometimes there's a little feedback on my side. So if there is, I'll put headphones in. How does it sound for you?
You seem to sound fine. I've got a little bit of the wavy, like internet connection type stuff, but other than that, it sounds fantastic. And I seem to have a good signal. So a lot of times I record on Squadcast, but I love the idea of the video. And I meant to compliment you right out of the gate. Your production quality is on point. So whatever it is that you're doing,
thank you.
It's working, and it works
Thank
great
you.
for the podcast.
I obviously invested some time and money to make this happen, and it's I get
Very
feedback
clear.
like that frequently recently, so it tells me I'm doing something right. So thank you.
Yeah, money well spent. For what I don't know how much it was, but it was money well spent.
Well, it paid for itself because it actually landed me a virtual keynote because I was this was the difference. It was between me and one other person, and they went with me 100% because they're like, image quality, lighting, sound, it's all on point. And they're like, our people are going to see you and consume you better regardless of content, right? And so I was like, okay, it paid for itself literally in one deal.
That's beautiful. Well, we're going to dive right into that because that's exactly some of the stuff I want to talk about. So on that note, this is the Extraordinary Podcast, and my guest today is Brian Bogert.
Hey, man, I'm so happy to be here with you.
Oh, man, I'm so thrilled to have you. So I got an introduction to you through our buddy Pablo Gonzalez. So I wanted right out of the gate, give our shout out to the Chief Executive Connector, because that's what he does and does so well.
Yeah, he does. I told him when we talked the first time, I'm like, man, you're like a world-class hype man. We got to get that tagline connected to him as well, because the guy he hypes everybody that he ends up, liking and supporting, and the guy's just amazing at it.
Yeah. Well, and it's cool because you can see the bright future ahead for him. And I was like, I just want to hold on to his coattails and just be along for the ride kind of thing.
Yeah. But he's good people. I agree. It's going to be fun to watch his trajectory.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Well, thank you first and foremost for taking the time to join us and to share your message. As I was getting ready for our interview, I was trying to read up. I'll try to catch up on all the other podcasts and make sure that I'm asking unique questions. So I reached out to Pablo. I'm going through his podcast going, I can't find the Brian one. What episode was it? And I come to find out he just got that little snippet that he posted online. He doesn't even have a full episode with you. So I was like, cool, I stole his guest right out from underneath him.
Yeah.
But
what's cool though is like we got on and it was just like an intro deal, and he immediately pushed record and he's like, I'm recording this. And I was like, all right, whatever. Like I'm good with that. Right. And so we get done and we had like just a really good jam session back and forth. Like we were feeding off each other, and at the end, he's like, all right, well, I want to get you on my podcast, but I'm going to use this content now in a meaningful way. And I was like, cool, man. I love it. Like, let's go double down. Tell me if and how I can help. And we'll be on board. And man, he's just brilliant. Like I said, he's world-class hype man. He took like 3 or 4 little sections from just a conversation and found a way to repurpose it in a meaningful way, which, that's a gift.
Yeah. Well, that's what I love about him and you both is you're both creating really high quality level content. It's not just the message and the information is good, but the presentation, the work behind it to make it pop. Really, it's something that resonates for me with both of you guys. So
thank you very much.
In most cases with my guests, I don't really like to rehash their story and give that same kind of lick 'em, stick 'em, same bio background that everybody has. But in your case, it's pretty relevant. And so would you mind sharing the story about your arm and about how that kind of started you down this trajectory?
Absolutely.
Just if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I agree. I think that's one of those things I didn't used to ever lead with that story, but the more I've been doing this, the more I realize like it is so unique. It gets people's attention. And so from that lens, I want everybody to just close their eyes for 1 second. Anybody who's listening or watching, and I want you to imagine walking out of a store after a successful shopping trip and turning your head and seeing a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. That's where this portion of my story begins. You can open your eyes now. But as we were doing this, my mom, my brother, and I went to the local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And we get to the car, and I was always there first, right? I've always had energy. I was excited to get home and put that paintbrush to use. So I get there, put my hand on the handle, and wait for my mom to catch up to unlock the doors. And when this happened, a truck pulls up in front of the store. The driver and the middle passenger get out, and the passenger all the way to the right feels the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, Nate, and he moves over to put his foot on the brake, but he instead hits the gas. So a combination of shock and force threw him up onto the steering wheel, up onto the dashboard. And before you know it, he's catapulting across the parking lot 40 miles an hour right at us. Now, we were parked in an end spot, which might have helped a little bit because it slowed down his momentum by going up and over the median, up and over the tree, and he hit our car. And when that happened, it threw me to the ground, ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body. So I was blessed that day, believe it or not, because although I'm laying there on a 115-degree day in Phoenix in the asphalt with my arm 10 feet away, my guardian angel watched the whole thing happen. She walked out of the Walmart and it was a nurse that saw the life and limb scenario that was in front of her. So she immediately went into action, rushed over, put her hands on the wound to stop the bleeding, and instructed some innocent bystanders to go get a cooler, fill it up with ice, and get my arm on ice within minutes. Had she not done either or both of those things, I either wouldn't be here with you today, or I would be here with you today with no arm, right? Like those are the only two alternatives. But her fast action is why I'm here today, and the beginning reason as to why I have an arm still attached. Now, I had phenomenal medical staff, 24 surgeries, years of recovery. And, you know, I know, like to your point, you don't like to regurgitate these stories, but I will tell you that in all the time I've been doing this, right, telling my story and trying to find ways to impact lives, the more I've done this, the more I realize that what's really important is, although I've got a unique story, we all have unique stories. And what's important is that we pause and become intentional and aware of the lessons we can extract from the stories, and then become extra intentional with how do we apply them into our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. And we have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories. We can shorten the curve to our own learning if we're just aware and paying attention. And so I'll share two primary lessons with you that I took from this. The first is I learned not to get stuck by why or what had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with it. And the second didn't come until far later, but it's one of my guiding principles in life at this point. And, you know, really when I look at it, I was in a fog for a lot of those years, Nate. Like, honestly, like recovery as a 7, 8, 9-year-old. I mean, I was aware and knew what was happening, and there was lots of moments of like clarity, but at the same time, like, it's just life. And you're a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, you're just going along the path. So those years of surgery and recovery and things, I was just going along for the path, right? And that doesn't mean I didn't have to do the work, didn't have to have the mental toughness, but I was along for the ride. My parents, however, were intimately aware of the unceasing medical treatments, years of recovery. And the idea of their son growing up without the use of his arm was a source of great suffering for them. And so they literally willed themselves day in and day out through discomfort, through pain, through struggle, to ultimately strengthen me, right? To heal me. They did that to benefit me. And so the lesson that I learned was to embrace pain to avoid suffering. And it's that same concept that I've used to not only overcome this unique injury, but how my business partners and I built our last business from $250,000 to over 15 million within the span of a decade. And now how I've helped hundreds of individuals and businesses just like you become more aware, more intentional, and who they already are, their most authentic selves. Because that, to me, is when the door starts to crack to perspective, motivation, direction. Joy, freedom, and fulfillment start to come back into the life. And all of a sudden, that's when we start to gain freedom.
Yeah. Well, and your obstacle became your way. You know, it's like this story, why I felt like it was so relevant to open with it, is because it's the defining characteristic that then created this path for you to ultimately journey down.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think everything happens to us for a reason, and I'm just blessed that I was able to find the reason, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things that when you go through something like this, you're seeking for answers, and it was a long journey, but ultimately it pointed me where I needed to be.
Well, and to deal with, like, it's very easy for me to reflect as a grown adult on how to deal with trauma, how to process some of those kind of things. But as a 6-year-old, you don't have the mental faculty, you know, you don't have the understanding of even how to process all of that.
Yeah. And the reality of it is because of that, right? Despite attempts from parents and different things, like, you go into survival mode, right? And I didn't realize that survival mode is literally what allowed me to survive and heal, but it also numbed me in lots of ways for a lot of years that I didn't realize until far later in my life, right? It really was a survival tactic, because when I shut off physical pain, I also shut off emotional pain. And both of those were survival tactics, right? Not intentional, but it just happened. The mind is a very powerful thing, and it literally flipped the switch. And it's like, nope, you can't cope with this, so we're just going to shut it off.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like post-traumatic. Well, it's post-traumatic stress.
It's PTSD.
It's learning how to, well, and what I love about the concept of accepting pain to avoid suffering is that you have to face those demons. You have to face that struggle. And once you learn once you accept that fact that like you said, you were along for this ride. You couldn't just avoid it. You couldn't just walk away from it or anything else like that. Once you accept it and then okay, now I got to deal with it, then it becomes a source of not pride, a source of I'm trying to think
fuel for your path.
Fuel for your
that's what
fire.
it is. I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like you said it best. It's like I wasn't in a position to be able to do that, shutting it off and avoiding it and all those things. And like that's the funny thing about pain, right? The world like has such a strong narrative that we must reduce, avoid, or eliminate pain. Like that's what the world tells us. All these messages, all these things, look at all the numbing agents that exist out there. Like that's what it tells us. And I'm here to tell you the world is wrong, right? Like what you just said is, it's like what I've learned more than anything is when we turn into those moments, when we learn to embrace that pain, right? That's when we really start to move forward, grow, heal, and all of the above. And what you just said is exactly perfect, right? There's multiple examples of this concept, but one of the ones that connects very deeply to this is like, I had to embrace the pain later in life of realizing that when I shut off physical pain, I shut off emotional pain. I had to embrace the pain literally of unpacking that, reliving those experiences so that I could feel in order to heal later in life, to avoid the suffering of like this numbness because I was shut off, right? And if you look in different categories in life, right, you can embrace the pain of hitting the gym 30 minutes a day to avoid the aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. You can embrace the pain of firing your top salesperson as a business owner to avoid the suffering of stagnant growth and losing all your other top talent because they're the biggest cancer in your society. Like the reality of it is, how often in our lives do we turn away from that pain, avoid that difficult conversation with a loved one that ultimately puts us in misery, a horrible relationship that can't grow, can't flourish, right? We avoid those things of going to therapy, doing the stuff that's necessary to heal. And that's just why I'm so adamant about this concept, because those are the moments that make the difference. Those are the moments when we lean in, like they really do give us the tools to grow and succeed.
They define your character.
That's it.
A lot of times. Yeah. Well, I came across a really good quote the other day. I had posted on social media. It's like, talking about it's all hard. Like marriage is hard. Divorce is hard. Getting that new client is hard. Losing that client is hard. It's all hard. It's like, choose your hard. Which hard are you going to take? But to think that you can go a path that's not hard, it's just not realistic.
So it's interesting though. I saw the same meme and it was funny because I kind of, even though it aligns with my philosophy.
You didn't like it?
Well, I loved it. But on the other side of the same coin, the narrative that no matter what, our only choice is hard, I struggle with that a little bit, because I do believe what you said. Like there is no path to greatness. Like nothing meaningful in life isn't difficult in some capacity, right? And it's like, choose it, right? What that is like, you can choose this that's hard, or this will hurt you on the back end that's hard, right? Like it's the same messaging, pain and suffering,
right?
But where I struggled with how I read it, this is how I internalized it, is there's no gaining freedom on the other side of it. It was only hard through the lens of that narrative. And I think what I'm saying is like, I'm not about putting ourselves into unnecessary amounts of pain, right? I am about embracing the pains that are necessary to getting to our pathway to success, but removing as many of those difficult things and hurdles along our way. So if we use like a gym example, and I'll relate this to myself, right? Now I have an imbalance in my body. I don't have a tricep. My bicep is my gracilis from my leg. I don't have a lat on the left side of my back, right? I have a curve in my spine, literally because of the imbalance in the muscle structure. And over the years, it continues to pull. Well, it didn't really affect me for a long time, but probably 12-ish years ago, I started to get suffering in my back, like consistent, regular pain that wasn't going to be alleviated just because. And what I realized is, now there's a whole lot of things I do for body care now to maintain like a baseline level so I can operate. But one of the first things I realized is like, if I keep a lean body, if I have a strong muscle structure, my core is strong, I try to work out my left side and balance as much as I can, right? Then ultimately, right, when I do those things, I'm in less pain. Well, so what did I do? I did what all of us would do. And I went and joined a gym. And then I started going to the gym, and I just immediately stopped going to the gym within a month. And I had to really ask myself that critical question, right? Is it the pain of working out that I'm avoiding? Or is it the anxiety I got when I went to a crowded gym? And for me, it was absolutely the second. the anxiety of going to a crowded gym, right, is what I tended to avoid. And so I knew the pain I needed to avoid. So I had to remove that hurdle. And that's when I started to build out my own home gym, which I had to embrace the pain, right, of investing the money and creating a space in my house to give myself the ability to do it. But the reality of it is like, that's where that narrative on that meme I didn't identify with is, it's like the narrative there's like, it's always going to be hard. Right. Well, the reality of it is like, it's not always hard. And typically when you make those decisions and lean into pain in the beginning, the more you do that, the easier it gets. It's not as painful. It's not as hard, right? Working out to me now isn't actually a challenge to do. It's a part of who I am. It fuels me, right? So it's not hard anymore. It's actually easy and energy. So that's where I struggled with the meme, is it didn't look at the other side of like, when you make those choices consistently, they add up to literally give you freedom, and it's not hard anymore.
Yeah. Well, I spent 2 hours last night diving into the 12 rules of life on another podcast with a buddy of mine from Jordan Peterson. So many of those principles applied to this. So I'm like, I've got this brain thing going on of like,
yeah, dude, you're like wired.
Meshing the everything that I've been gaining off of your content, and then everything reflecting from last night. So it's all kind of coming together into one big conglomeration, if you will. But one of the things I like about that is like, what your point is accurate, but like I was thinking about it from the perspective of when you do all these little hard things along the way, they lead to greatness. It's, I guess,
100%.
So like when I think of it like that, and coming from the endurance mentality, it's like if you do a lot of the little steps along the way, then they'll ultimately take you to where it is you want to go. And I guess that's really what the meme was missing.
You're right. You're right. Exactly. 100%. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that's why I say I loved it, but I wished it would have closed it with like, when you do these, you get this on the back end, right? Because it just changes the whole way we interpret that.
Because there needs to be some kind of intrinsic reward at the end of the day. Like there's got to be some kind of value that you get from all this pain and suffering and misery and heartache.
Totally. Yeah. And that's why my message, right, starts with embrace pain, avoid suffering, right? So it's like, make those decisions to avoid the suffering, but it closes with gain freedom,
like,
right? Because that's really what we're seeking.
Yeah, pain is temporary, suffering lasts a long time, kind of concept.
That's right. Yeah.
I love it.
And I just believe like we all must choose our pain, or our suffering will choose us, right? That's what that meme was saying as well, right?
That's
like,
a great perspective.
You choose this hard, or this hard will choose you. It's the same concept.
Well, I want to spend a lot of time talking about your coaching and your public speaking in particular. But before we leave, talking about the trauma that you experienced with your arm, because I'm a snowboarder and I love, and I've broken quite a few bones, and of course that same arm in a couple of different places. So it was funny for me. I kind of got the willies more from hearing about the broken arm struggle than I did about this losing the arm thing, just because of the relationship in my mind of having that correlation there. But when you broke your arm that second time snowboarding, what was that experience like from that post-traumatic stress kind of concept? And then what was the most difficult part coming back from that?
Yeah. Great question. I like how you framed that. So thank you. The reality of it is I had built up such a strong, crusty exterior and narrative to the world that I was good, I was strong, I didn't need help, I was capable. And that really spawned from that 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, right, that was being immediately labeled as like not capable of doing something. I had other people placing limits on me, and I was like, I refused to be defined by other people's boundaries. Like, I'm going to set them myself. Exactly. Right. And I really honed that mental toughness piece in that period of my life. But what's interesting is it's like, I also didn't realize until far later that was actually me having a chip on my shoulder. Like, I had to prove it, not just to the world, but to myself. Right. And so when you build up that crusty exterior, like the thing that lacks is human connection. And so when I'm in that moment, that is what I realized is the world bought into my narrative, right? They bought into Brian's good. He's strong. He's capable. He doesn't need help. And so nobody was there to help.
What you were selling.
They literally bought what I was. And because I hadn't established really good enough connection, even though I had lots of relationships and friends, like the connection wasn't deep enough that like literally there was like one person that was there with me along that journey who was a good friend who just knew I needed it. But outside of that, right, I didn't have any help and I didn't have the courage to ask for it. Right. And so when you talk about like, what was the most difficult thing, I will tell you there was a lot. And so that list is going to be very difficult. That was the part that hit me in the face, is like, okay, now all of a sudden I'm 20, I'm on this journey somewhat alone, right? Because I'm not even living in the state with my family. And in my prior period, I told you I was kind of along for the ride. I did the work, but like I didn't have to think about the work. I just did it, right?
Right.
And now as a 20-year-old, I'm re-experiencing a lot of the struggles that I had at 7, right? Like having to figure out how to do things again with one hand, like button my pants or tie my shoes or whatever, right? Like I had learned how to use my left hand enough that all those things became easy. I was using them with 2 hands again. But there was a period when I was a kid, I had to do everything with one hand. And now I had to, like, fortunately, I learned and remembered how to do most of it, but there was a little struggle getting back into that rhythm. And so that really hit me hard. You know, I haven't necessarily said it in this way before, but the way you asked the question, I think it really brought it home. Man, I went into a deep depression that summer too. You know, that 10-month window, I went through 7 surgeons who were all afraid to touch me because of the medical malpractice. They didn't want to repair the bone. They tried multiple different procedures, all of which I told them were going to fail. You know, bone stimulation, Sarmiento pressure, these things where the anatomy on my arm is different. It's not going to heal based on normal process. Not.
Yeah.
And they said, well, let's try it anyway. Well, 10 months later, my arm is still there hanging broken with the risk of that bone clipping a nerve or a vein, or like literally on the edge of potentially losing my arm again at any moment. Ultimately got that fixed, but that I think was one of the hardest things, was the depression, the isolation, the loneliness, the struggle, and doing it alone. And I wasn't in a position, like I said, to have the support or ask for it. I wasn't there yet. So, and I would also tell you that the actual physical recovery was a challenge. Now I knew how to push myself, but my arm, when your arm doesn't move really and is stationary for 10 months, everything locks up. So it's like other than my hand movement, all of the therapy and freedom of movement, my shoulder, my elbow, my everything, my arm was like a board at the end of that 10 months. And so I did not go into therapy because I felt like I knew enough to be able to push through, because I'd done it so much in my life. And so I ingrained like a daily practice of stretching and getting movement and mobility and strength training and getting all those things back, which took the better part of 6 months to a year before my arm was even close to the mobility I had pre that accident. So those 2 things were probably the hardest. And then to pull yourself out of that depression, it's not like your arm just gets fixed and everything's fixed. You know, it impacted me for a period of time. Now I shifted that focus, you know, into human connection, because I realized at that moment, like what I had been doing in the prior period wasn't serving me, and it wasn't going to serve me moving forward. And that like crusty exterior and chip on my shoulder had to be gone. Right. And so that's what I did. I focused really deeply on vulnerability, human behavior, authenticity. And I took the emotional intelligence that I had honed in that prior period and frankly, as a defense mechanism, to divert attention from me by focusing on other people and reading, right? Like reading them, understanding group dynamics, understanding body language, micro expressions. Like I knew how to read people because I learned how to do it to divert the attention. Right. And so now I was able to apply that into like, how do I actually focus on building connection? And that was the gift that came from that period.
That's amazing. That's really interesting. So let me ask you, when you were going through the physical therapy, did you go through therapy, like dealing with the therapist to deal with the emotional and the mental side of it as well? Did you deal with that at a young age? And then again, after when you went into that depression as basically an adult, did you deal with it then as well?
Actually, neither. And that's and candidly, it's because I had shut off emotional pain. I even though I knew I was depressed, like it still was pale in comparison, I think, to a full understanding of like emotional resilience and maturity. And the emotional piece didn't come in for me until far later. So I focused on this human connection, authenticity, all of that stuff. But what I realized, I had some other health stuff that ended up impacting me that really rattled me and my kind of sense of self and identity, because I got some brain fog and fatigue, and we got all that fixed. But what happened in that last experience was I started to feel in a way that I never had. I started with a moment where I was literally on the couch with my daughter and she brought me to tears. You know, you probably heard that story, right? And literally, like, I was blown away because I just had so much fun with her. I never expressed emotion via tears. I still don't frequently. And by the way, I wish I did, right? It's a great release and healing mechanism for so many people. And I love it when men cry. It's just, that's not how my body does it, right? So when I cried out of tears, like, it was a shock for me. And I had to really question, like, if these tears are coming from pure joy, like, I really wasn't experiencing the other spectrum. And so the reality of it is is my block was I had shut off emotional pain, and that also confined my emotions into this tiny little box. And so that's the next evolution of the journey, is I realized that human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. I was doing vulnerability and authenticity and human connection from a tactical standpoint, and I'd mastered that. But I really didn't have the empathetic lean in on understanding from, again, that emotional maturity standpoint. So once I started to unpack that emotional piece for myself over the last, period of my life, I go to therapy frequently.
Yeah, that's where it all really began to change.
Like, it's one of those things where, like, it is such a freeing thing to understand it, and I'm a big believer in coaches all over the board. So not only am I doing that, I mean, I've got a Reiki energy healer, a meditation coach. I have 2 different business coaches. It's like, I'm constantly looking for ways that I can learn and grow and find as many ways to eliminate blind spots for myself, which I do believe often only happens from outside perspective.
Very true. Yeah, that's exactly why we have coaches, to help us identify those blind spots, those spots in the road, for sure. Oh, that's beautiful, man. That's so many different ways to go with all of that. Oh my goodness. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So, you've taken this story, now it's become a platform for now you to help others and to go into the coaching, and you're kind of on this path that I strive to go down. I think Pablo and I both have identify a lot with what you're doing, and our hopes to kind of do the same. Number one, how did you get good at public speaking? Did you do a Toastmasters? Did this come naturally to you? Is it just the process of doing it 1,000 times?
It's a combination of all of the above, honestly. The same reason you asked me to tell my story is the same reason that when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, a lot of the healthcare organizations that I was a patient at were asking me to tell my story, right? It was unique. It was ultimately a success story. It gets your attention because you don't really hear of this a whole lot. And even when you do have detached limbs that get often they aren't functional like mine is. I mean, I have full practical use, and again, that's a testament to the medical staff and to my family. And I mean, there's so much that went into this. It's not like I got lucky. There was a lot that went into it that all come. So I was on stage literally at age 7. And I've always had a loud voice and I've never been shy. So you combine all those things and they're like, how do we get this 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, right? That, everybody's got a melting heart for kids, particularly kids who can communicate. And so that was the truth. There was a little piece of it came naturally, right? Like, truthfully, I mean, it's one of those, and I don't say this to impress, I say it to impress on the point. I mean, I was speaking full sentences at 18 months. Like, I came out like hard charging into the world. And that's kind of funny because
to be a podcaster.
Yeah. My second grade teacher said to my mom right after my accident, she's like, man, I think Brian had a brush with death. And it's like, he's on a mission to conquer the world. And she's like, no, he's been like that since the day he was born. Right. Like, what this did was provide humility and perspective for me. And so the communication piece was always natural. You threw out 4 different things. And by the way, when I say it's a combination of all of them, that's why I'm hitting it on them. Right. When I was, I think 10 or 11, my grandma was like, oh, Brian needs to be in Toastmasters. Right. My grandma is like I'm still super, super close with her. It's a sad story today because she was a polio survivor and just tough as nails. Right. And a forever learner, got multiple degrees well into her 60s. And why I say it's a sad story is she's got Alzheimer's today and it's declined really, really fast. But she had such an impact on my life because one of the things she said is she's like, Brian's a good communicator. He's got a good story. He needs to learn how to tell it. So we get into Toastmasters, and I think I did it for a year or 2. And it was cool because my natural gift and my ability to have already been communicating for 3 or 4 years on stage, I went into Toastmasters like gangbusters, and I started winning the awards.
Take over the place.
10, 11-year-old, right?
Who is this little snot that just came in here and got it
off? Who the hell
off?
is this kid, right? And then the reality of it is it's the last piece is the most important, is the reps. Right? The amount of times that I've not only told my story, but then had the opportunity to pivot to the human behavior stuff that I talk about, to really work with individuals. I mean, I have been doing this my whole life. And what's really interesting is I was blind to how much I was actually doing it. I mean, it was just natural and ingrained in who I was. And it was when I hired my first coach 7 years ago that he said, Bogert, like, you need to be doing this. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, speaking and coaching. And I was like, no. Like, buddy, I'm paying you a ton of money, not to tell me how great I am, but to help me figure out these other things. I don't need something else added to my plate. And he's like, okay, trust me. And he just trickled it, right? And it turns out he told me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. And the reality of it is he was right. And over the course of the following 9 months, like, there was just a whole culmination of events that made it very clear, like, he was right and I needed to lean in. And so since that time, it's taken what I was doing really informally, put a formal structure to it, but it also opened up the floodgates to have a volume of opportunities on stages and in coaching to, like, get my reps doing that. And then, where I've been at, and one of the things you saw that you leaned into, and this is what I talked about with Pablo, the podcasting thing is like a whole different venture, and it's challenged me in a whole different way because I was used to telling long form story, right? I was used to being on a live stage. And although podcasts, you have the opportunity to do the same thing, it's also very conversational, which I was fine with. But it also, I was thinking after I did probably 10, 15, 20 of them, I started to notice, like, I don't consume podcasts the way I communicate on podcasts. Meaning I left lots of doors open in, like, open conversation on things. And so somebody really would have to listen to 2 or 3 questions to get the full context and value. And so I started to shift my communication style for this medium. I still have long form on stage, but for this medium, I shifted to 3 to 5 minute sound bites. Nice. And then I got a lot of reps doing that. And the more reps I got doing that, the better it started to capitalize. And so I think when you saw the thing with Pablo, I talked to him a few weeks back. I think I was like 65-ish podcasts, somewhere between 65 and 70. I've done well over 80 since then. And it's crazy what has continued to happen. I just continue to be blessed to be with people like you. And, I'm on a mission to impact 1 billion people over the next 25 years. And so this is a phenomenal platform to really have impact. Yeah. Right. And to my own detriment, I discounted the value of these for a long time. And so now I'm all in. I mean, like I said, when I did 80, that's been in the last 4 months. But this week alone, I haven't even counted that into the number. Last week and this week alone, last week, I think I did 9 or 10. And this week in 3 days, I've already done 12. And so it's kind of crazy when you think about, right, when we talk about those small things done consistently, it really does create that compound effect. And that's what's starting to happen here.
Yeah. Well, I love that you get that momentum, you get that ball rolling. And what's so beautiful about what you just said is, like, we talk about, like, just keep going, start ugly, all that kind of stuff, but improving along the way, taking the time to go back and listen, to realize where your shortcomings are, and to create these opportunities to make a better product, to continue to evolve the product, to continue to evolve the podcast, make it better. So let me ask you about the life coach, because it sounds like they've had a big impact on you. How did you go about finding that one in particular? Was that fortuitous, or did you have a process for that, or how did that happen?
It started like just a little bit. I started seeking and asking people for recommendations. Here's the interesting thing about that story, and it's going to probably make me sound bad, although I've said it publicly before. I interviewed 14 before I got to him, and was literally about to give up on hiring a coach because almost all of them were like an inch deep and a mile wide, right? They hung their hat as a coach. They took some certification or training program. They had, like, tools that they were trained on to be able to use. And by the way, I say that with no detriment, because all of those things really do matter and they're all having a big impact. But for me, right, they didn't have the relevance, the credibility for where I needed to go. They didn't have understanding on, like, literally the same level of, like, personal struggle. And it's not fair, because I realize mine is infinitely greater than what many experience. But
right.
It's all in the eye.
When you've got a better story than they do, it's kind of tough, right?
Yeah. But I mean, it's all in the eye of the beholder, right? So, like, right, they just, there wasn't. I'm sure they all had struggle, and I asked those questions, and that's what it was. But they also didn't have the business success and credibility, right? They hadn't ever built anything. They hadn't really, like, been a part of, like, standing a company up. They didn't know what true leadership looked like, because they weren't ever a true leader in a business, right?
They never had 50 employees or 100 employees working for them at a time.
And again, and so it was just one of those things where I was like, like, there was just a miss. It just didn't feel right. And if I'm going to go down this path with any one of them, I could read a book and get the same type of knowledge, right? Like, I need somebody that has a high level of emotional intelligence, but also the understanding of where to connect the dots on the back end, right? Like, that's what was needed. And that's who I landed on. So I ended up getting, and his name's Ben Newman. He's killing it in the space.
You said Ben Newman?
Ben Newman. He's out of St. Louis, and I worked with him, I think, for 3 years. We did some collaboration stuff early on as well when I launched my business. I'm forever indebted to the guy because, he served the exact purpose at the exact time in my life. And, it's one of those things, I think we all have seasons with the people that we work with, right? And I got what I needed and went on and kind of continued down that path. We've stayed connected and friends, but it was the 15th guy or gal, right? I interviewed some women as well. And he was the 15th person. And it was one of those things where I was just like, you know what, this is the guy. Like, it connected on every level. He had relevance, he had credibility. He knew what I was talking about. And he helped me.
Was there anything particular about him that stood out compared to all the rest? Because we talk about how the others were like an inch deep and a mile wide.
Well, I mean, all the stuff that I told you were deficiencies. Yeah, all the stuff that were deficiencies he had. Yeah. Right now, he's got a really unique story. Anybody who can find him can see this. His was not something that he personally went through, but it was, right? It was a story about his mom who was diagnosed with amyloidosis, which is an extremely rare disease, and how he used to watch her walk down the hallway with her, with the medical bags hanging from it so that she could
like
put
the
them
IV
to bed
bags.
Yeah. And so I had a total brain fart there. Thank you. And so he talks about like the struggle and like the importance of story and like that, it's a matter of like how you live your life. And then he had a lot of success in the insurance space. He was, a top 1% producer for a large international company. He knew what it was like. He had his own business. He had some employees. He'd sold it. And he already was 5 or 6 years into his venture of building out his coaching business. He was building out another business in his coaching business that was pretty substantial, right? And so he just had those things and we just connected. So it was one of those things that, you just know when you know. I mean, I had a call with him and I told him at the end of the call, I said, I'll be back to you pretty quickly, but I have a sense this is going to happen. And within 30 minutes, I shot him a text and was like, I'm in, let's go.
Nice. Well, it's cool that you had that insurance thing because your background is with some insurance as well. Did that play a role in it? The fact that y'all kind of
a little bit, but it was a different kind of insurance, so it wasn't completely relatable. But at the same time, I think the reason it was relatable is I was in a business where we were selling gray matter, right? I wasn't selling copiers or paper or some tangible product. We were selling intellectual property. We were selling gray matter, and so I do believe that like inherently in sales, that is harder. When you're going into a sales environment and you're trying to grow a business around something that people can't touch and feel and smell and taste and right, like it's harder for your product to speak for itself until they take a leap of faith. And typically in that space as well, you have to get somebody fired before you get hired. And so those two dynamics really like translated well, even though it was a different kind of insurance. He understood that piece.
Awesome. Well, so I'm going to pick your brain a little bit going down this little rabbit hole, because again, trying to bring all this to fruition for me, it's been a real struggle because I come from a construction background. I'm used to swinging a hammer. I'm used to really having something to show for my efforts at the end of the day, something physical, tangible that you can put your hands on. And now in this space, like you said, what we're delivering as an intangible, it's a gray matter type of thing. So it's been really tough for me to understand how to bring that to market. So how did that work for you? And what advice would you have for me trying to do that?
Yeah, so I think it's a little different in every world, but I will tell you, I think I think this is true for sales across the board. It's even more true with anything that's gray matter, right? And there's nothing tangible. I think you're only as good as your questions. Right. And so I learned that pretty early, that I could differentiate myself by the questions that I asked and how I made people think and how I made them feel by the questions that I asked. And sometimes it was in a challenger capacity. Sometimes it was literally like just helping them think through and solving a problem. But when I realized that in that space, it wasn't about selling a product. It wasn't about positioning, right? Like why we're better than somebody else. But all of our buyers were conditioned that way. Because in gray matter, I think most salespeople default to try to make it tangible, right? And I think that's where they start to condition the buyers and the people in that field. So when you don't try to make it tangible, you automatically stand out. So I'll give you an example of that, right? Let's just call health insurance or risk management in general, right? Any kind of like business insurance. I don't know the statistic. This is a complete gut feel, so I apologize if this isn't accurate. I'm not sure we can measure this. I'm going to go as far to say is 90 to 95% of salespeople, business owners in that space go into the meeting with the sole purpose of a couple of things: getting another meeting and walking out with some level of data that they then can put into action to go market the business and show why their marketing efforts produce a different result. Well, what's even harder in that space is if you have 5 brokers that are competing in the same space and they all get the same data, they're all going to get the same rates, right? So like, how do you differentiate? That's not like our product that we're placing, but that's how many people do it. So what do buyers do? They expect that you're going to walk in and that you're going to ask them, if it's on the benefit side, ask them for a census, ask them for their plans and rates, ask them for like what they're doing and like and they go in and they try to market. Now, when you get bigger and bigger deals, that happens less and less, but it still exists where people are like conditioned to be like, okay, like here's what it is. And they're also conditioned, the buyers are, because the third thing that the people try to do is tell them why they're the best company on the planet in the very first meeting with no specificity or relevancy to their company. And so I learned quickly that those were all 3 things that I wasn't going to drive towards. And so I would go in and I would just ask questions. I would go in without a presentation. I would go in and just ask questions, right? And when I wasn't as confident in it early in my career, right, I would walk in and I'd sit down next to a buyer that was twice my age, had kids my age, right? And all of a sudden they get there and they're high on their horse, and all of a sudden they say, so why should we work with you? Why are you the best company for us to do business with? And early, when I didn't have the confidence, what did I do? I vomited all over them for all the reasons that I could think of that were like, here's why we're the best. Here's why we can do this. This is what we can do. This, and I fell into
puke on a page is what I'd always call it.
Yeah. And it was one of those things where it's like, I wasn't getting any results. So when I realized I was really good at getting meetings, but I wasn't that great at getting results right out of the gate. And so I was like, I need to pivot. So I just told this story actually the other day to somebody who asked me this, and this is still one of my favorite sales meetings. I only ever did it one time because I felt like it would backfire on me if I tried it again. But I walked into a meeting and the guy literally was like, all right, so why are you the best company for us? Why should we do business with you? And I opened up my portfolio. This was before iPads and stuff, right? I literally had a portfolio with a pad and everything. I ripped off a blank piece of paper and I pushed it across the table. I said, this is why. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I can't answer the question until I ask you enough questions to really be able to fill out this piece of paper where I can be relevant and specific as to why we might be able to help you. But the reality of it is we might have this conversation. We'll write down all these answers to questions that I want to ask you to really understand where you want to go, where you've come from, what your goals are, how and where we might be able to fit and close those gaps. And I might tell you at the end of the meeting, we're not the best for you. I don't know enough today to answer your question. So if you're willing to help me fill out this piece of paper, I think we can answer that question hopefully by the end of the meeting. But if we can't, then that tells us that there's not a path and I don't need to waste your time any further.
Yeah.
Right. And the guy immediately like sat back and he looked at me and he's like, you've got some balls. And I said, I don't know if I have balls or if I'm just stupid, but the reality of it is my answer is not incorrect. I can't answer the question effectively without sounding like a sales guy until I get the opportunity to ask questions. So you tell me. And he ultimately leaned in and he's like, all right, game on. Right. So when you talk about like when you're transitioning into this space, how do you add value in gray matter? I genuinely believe it's the same thing in coaching. It's the same thing in speaking. It's if you determine if and how you can help and you ask really good questions and you realize that nothing about your trajectory is based on that one deal, typically you're going to stand out in the crowd.
Nice. I love that. So you have 2 kind of demographics that you cater to. A lot of your content is based on business principles, and you have a lot of your keynotes will be very much geared towards them. But then you've also got the kind of the personal development coaching aspect where you're helping folks like me trying to find our path and that sort of thing. What is your key demographic in the personal development space, and how did you determine that was your key demographic?
So I would tell you, so in the personal development space, there's 3 different layers to what that looks like. And so the answer changes based on which category we're in. And that happened, by the way, as evolution. That didn't happen overnight. That happened after, again, a ton of reps, really getting understanding of like where to go with this. So I'll start with my one-to-one coaching, right? That's when I go deep with people. I'm going to work with somebody one-to-one. We're going to really understand what it is. And my key demographic, I don't even like saying this out loud because it sounds like I'm exclusive, but the reality of it is these are just typically the people that I know I can have the biggest impact with that are also going to have a ripple effect back down below them and into the world. So most of the time I'm working with entrepreneurs, high-level C-suite type executives, or like high-level managers in the large companies, high-performing salespeople. And then typically, I've also worked with athletes, but that's a smaller portion of my segment. Most of the time, these individuals have earned multiple six figures, seven figures. Money is not an issue. Success isn't an issue, right? They've understood how to build something, but they're feeling stuck. They're feeling stymied in their efforts to fill their potential. And often they've been so isolated and focused that they may have had financial success, they may have had business success, but they're miserable in every other area of their life, right? Like they just don't know how to get there. And they've been so focused and isolated that they've never really taken a step back to get a clear understanding of who they are, right? They've focused on the what first instead of the who. And the reality of it is the what can be really, really successful until a point, but then it sacrifices the who. And so what that's done, right, is I have to help them shed those layers, get a lot of clarity into emotional triggers and behavioral patterns and things, and gain clarity back into their life so we can structure it back into alignment so they can live with no limits. And then they get joy, freedom, and fulfillment back into every category of their life. And I know it sounds too good to be true, right? Like no, I'm not like sense. Guaranteeing success or promise on anything. It's a lot of work, right? And the people that get the greatest results are the ones that commit to the process the most. And so I don't have like a one size fits all solution. This is all a very individualized, intrinsic approach with people that I can leverage my skill sets, my experience to go deep with them. Now that said, in my one-to-one work, there are situations where people might not fit that demographic, but they're extremely growth-minded, and they also view the heavy investment in themselves, both with time and money, as something that's critical for their success. So although I say that's generally the approach, that's not always. But we also have a group coaching program that's at a lower price point that still gives myself or some of our other coaches involved in the process to get real-time feedback outside of just videos and content that they consume. They get actual coaching through it, but they also get accountability and connection with other people they go through it with. And so we create a community that they can build on, keep each other accountable. And then the last piece is a self-led version of a similar course that is based in the group coaching platform, but it's 100% self-led. There's no one-to-one coaching. There's no coaching impact. And then for the really, really low end of it all, we also sell what we call the No Limits Playbook, which is the basic concept that all of the other philosophies are built off of in a PDF, but with no additional context, prompting, thinking about it. It's just literally like questions and answers. And we sell that as well. That's a way low price point so that a lot of people can access. So
it's almost kind of like an e-workbook kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Gotcha. And so there's kind of a spectrum. And again, that spectrum didn't exist out the gate. That's after evolution, many years of like refining and making sure that, again, I want to impact 1 billion people. 99.99999% of those will never pay me $1. So like my website has a ton of free content. I'm sure you saw that when you went out there. I do that intentionally because I really genuinely want to help. But we also noticed that like there were people who wanted to invest in themselves but couldn't afford me one-to-one. So we had to build that back end because I genuinely want to give people those tools. I just have to pay attention to like where's the biggest impact for my time. And that's why we have other coaches that are becoming a part of the mix and things like that, because we can really leverage and scale from there. But on the lens of giving stuff away for free, I'll just tell you, I do have a free offer. Go to nolimitsprelude.com. And that is a free, succinct version of the playbook and a lot of our coaching philosophies that gives you some basic prompting on the questions to ask. And so if you literally have no idea where to start, like this is a tool that's free. It will give you some direction and some ability to like take yourself on that intrinsic journey. So by all means, feel free to go there. And anybody who's listening, I know it'll add value.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with our audience. And I'll make sure we have a show note link a link in the show notes to where everybody can go and quick access that. It's so great to be able to pick your brain because literally you are providing me with the blueprint of what it is I'm trying to do and what I hope to achieve with some of the program that I'm working on with the 8 Keys to Great. Going back to now that you've identified your customer or your potential client, that entrepreneur, that CEO type, how do you go about catering to them? How do you go about marketing to that? Because that's I struggled to understand what my demographic was, because to me, I didn't want to put any specific parameters on it because I felt like it was anyone who was having that time in their life where they're just trying to find some answers, where they're motivated to want to change.
Yep.
Now, whatever's happened in their life, whether it be a specific event or they're just sick and tired of being sick and tired. So it was really hard for me to say, okay, well, that's a 40-year-old white male, or that's a
Yeah.
20-year-old
I agree with that
millennial.
completely. Yeah.
So
It is really hard because, again, I feel like, right, I could help anybody. And I think in some ways, like, starting a little more broad, particularly if you feel like it is applicable across the board, there's a lot of people who are going to tell you, you have to niche, you have to niche, you have to niche, you have to niche. I think sometimes you'll organically find your niche. And so, if you just seek to determine if and how you can help and to serve, I think you're going to ultimately, like, find where that is. That's what I discovered is in my one-to-one work, those were the criteria of people that ended up coming to me, right? Organically through referrals. I'd meet them. A big portion of my one-to-one coaching has also come from people who were in the audience at conferences I've spoken at or different things where they connected and resonated. And so there was a lot of speaking. That's one of the reasons, frankly, I'm so anxious for live stages to come back. That's my favorite places to be. And the energy transfer in the room and the light bulbs that go off, like, I know I can have transformative moments within the span of an hour keynote, right? And podcasts, again, I think they add a lot of value. They don't go as deep. And I don't think there's the same ability to connect in the same way. So I've had a lot of people come to me on the one-to-one stuff through that. And frankly, through all the stuff I've been doing on podcasts and different things, I'm getting some flow there as well because people understand, they see the gap. And so that's been really good for our business. But I don't necessarily market directly to that category. I think that category often comes here because the messages resonate for them. It
finds you, kind of thing.
Yeah, it kind of finds you a little bit.
They find the message.
Yeah, and they connect with it. You know what? I mean, there are so many high performers who make a ton of money that look like they've got it all together on the outside, and on the inside, they know they're miserable or they're numbing in some way with some
alcohol, whatever,
substance or something that's they know is not good for
Ferraris,
them.
whatever.
Whatever. And I mean, again, there's no judgment on that when I say it. I numbed in periods of my life. Like there's moments where if we don't have the tools, that's all we have, right? And so, but I think they tend to find me because of the message. It resonates with them.
Gosh, man, there's so much more that I want to ask you, and we're already busted through our hour. Dang it. All right. So yeah, we're just gonna, if there's ever an opportunity to do a part 2, I've got so many more. Gosh, I just barely scratched the surface for what I wanted to cover, but we've blown through that hour like it was nothing.
Consider it done, man. We can do another show. I think that'd be great. Version 2, that'd be awesome.
Awesome. Okay, well, great. Well, because I've got a whole slew and litany of things I want to talk about, particularly around the public speaking and how I can get some opportunities. Because again, like, you had that opportunity presented because you got this calling. So again, at the early age you got, but for somebody like me who now, I didn't get my calling until 40 something, so now trying to backlog and trying to backtrack into some of those opportunities. I really want to understand what that process looks like, but we'll save it for part 2. As we wrap up, there's a couple of things I like to close with before we go. But before we do that, as we wrap, I want to make sure that you have a chance to plug your stuff, where people can find you, social media or otherwise, and any charitable organization that you're involved with or that you want to plug.
Man, I'm so happy you just said that. God, you gave me chills when you said the charitable organization. On all the podcasts that I've been on, you are the first person who's asked about that. And anybody who knows me or has done any kind of research on me knows that is something that moves me deeply. I've spent 30% of my time over the last 15 years in philanthropic and community efforts. So thank you. I'm going to answer the question first. All social media handles pretty much are at Bogert Brian. I'm going to tell you it's Bogert, Bogert, and Brian with an I. I say that because often people misspell my name, either one. Same thing.
And when you hear a redneck say Bogart, you tend to think
that happens all the time. Well, what's even better, I was on a show a couple weeks ago, and they literally spelled out my website. They were like, Brian Bogert. They spelled it out, and they said, so you can visit brianbogart.com. And I was like, no. It was a funny moment. But yeah, it's brianbogart.com, and that's where it's kind of the clearinghouse for a lot of the content. There's a whole lot that has happened in the last 4 months that has not been uploaded yet. But soon, if you guys are visiting this, you're going to see there's going to be a ton more content on there. And there's already a lot to begin with. Because again, I want to give away as much as I can.
Well, yeah,
And
and
then
check out that
lastly,
YouTube channel, the Brian Bogert YouTube channel, man. If you're looking for quality content, man, that's where I've been spending most of my time consuming your stuff.
hey, dude, thank you so much. Yeah, I've been doing this series called Bogert's Bullets for a few
Yeah,
years, and I
it's
paused for a little
amazing.
bit. And if you watch any of my early ones, you'll probably see a total difference, not only in the production quality, but even my energy and delivery. And that was reps and like different things. But yeah, there's a lot out there, and that I know that's a lot of people like seeing that once a week when it comes out. So thank you for saying that. You know, the charity that I want to plug is one that is actually I'm very new to, but I'm about to enter into a crazy venture over the next year with. And so it's Challenged Athletes Foundation. And the reason that I say that is I have never viewed myself as a challenged athlete. However, by
Awesome.
definition, I am, right? So anybody who's been following me as well knows that I decided a few months back I was going to do triathlon. What I haven't said publicly yet is that has blown up into something way bigger than myself that I'm very excited about. There will be some public news coming out from me soon on some other details, but I'll plug a piece of it. I'm not doing just the triathlon. I will be doing an Ironman within the next year, likely a couple of events, and I'm going to be doing it representing and being an ambassador for Challenged Athletes Foundation to really be able to, again, show some inspiration, show some perspective, show that we can live beyond limits, and really be able to help all of these athletes through fundraising efforts and different things, because they fund a lot of different things. And there's a product that I've been recently connected with out of the UK from another guy that had an upper body injury. He used to be a pro downhill mountain biker, brachial plexus injury, a guy by the name of Tom Wheeler. I'm doing some collaboration work with them right now as well, because they have designed a product to get people safely onto bikes who don't have the ability to grip onto the handlebars or have instability in their upper body. And CAF has also expressed interest in evaluating what this looks like to distribute to all of their beneficiaries, their people. And so there's a whole lot connected to this, but the only reason I'm saying I'm going to do an Ironman is because it's bigger than me, and I'm going to do it as a result of like what's possible. And so it's a phenomenal organization. Anybody who wants to follow me will see the journey that we're about to create. And again, I've got some news coming out with a big project we're working on here pretty soon. And any support would be phenomenal, because again, the more we can have collective impact on the world, the better. So thank you for asking that question.
Well, now I'm going to have to like rush this through production so we make sure to time it out right. Well, as a 4-time Ironman, I'm very excited for that challenge.
Yeah, buddy.
So right. I'm curious. Well, if you, so I only did one triathlon before I jumped into the full distance, but what's the full distance Ironman you have your eye on, just out of curiosity?
The one I'm going to be doing is
you're going to be in Kona? Oh, Texas. Nice.
Yeah, Texas. Now there's other pieces, but that's the one.
Yeah. And I don't want to give you, hopefully by the time this comes out, it'll all be old news.
Yeah, it'll all be public. But yeah, no, the one I've got my eyes set on is Texas in April.
That's amazing.
6 months out. It'll happen. It'll be good. And I'm looking forward to the journey.
Well, now, if you'll indulge me for just a quick second, I have to share with you my first Ironman story real quick, because it relates exactly to you so beautifully. So, training for my first Ironman, it wasn't actually technically an Ironman branded event. It was Bone Island Triathlon down in Key West, Florida.
Okay.
And I've been training for this thing. I'm all geared up, and I'm nervous as you can possibly imagine, because you're getting ready to jump into all this, how intimidating that can be. And I'm sitting there, I'm so nervous before the thing. I actually walk into the women's restroom to go use the bathroom because I'm just so freaked out about everything going on. And as I'm sitting there, there's athletes coming in and out of the water. They're getting warmed up. And there's this one athlete, this silhouette that comes out of the water. And as I'm looking at him, his profile looks different than all the rest. There's something off about his body shape or whatever. And I realize he doesn't have any arms. He has one arm is cut off at the elbow, and the other one is it's just an inch or two off the shoulder. And I was so nervous about going in this thing. And the first part of it, you're going to swim basically 2.5 miles. And this guy coming out of the water with no arms, going into this race with that, with those impairments or those challenges, man, it completely shifted my entire mindset. It completely shifted everything that I was scared and nervous about. I was like, you have got absolutely nothing to complain about, nothing to be scared of. This guy is, that's the real deal. You want to be nervous, you want to be scared, go do what this guy's doing. And
Dude, you gave me literally chills, all goosebumps up and down my entire body. That's what I want to be a part of.
It's amazing. Well, and that's one of my, we talked earlier about the hard things, and one of the practices I preach about is to do hard things, and how important that is to your psyche and your well-being when you accomplish a hard task like doing an Ironman. That'll change who you are. It'll change, it'll make you, I believe it makes you a better person for sure. So,
I completely agree. So
Brian, thank you so much for your time. Last two questions. First one's easy, last one's kind of hard, but it's kind of fun. So if you had a billboard for all the world to see, what would you put on it? And the last question is, what's your favorite item under $100 that you use on an everyday basis that you could not live without?
Wow.
And while you might think those are great questions, I stole both of them so I can take no credit. Tim Ferriss.
Okay. On the billboard, I probably would say, and this is, if you followed Bogert's Bullets recently, you'll see this is kind of my sign off, right? I would probably say be great and be you. And I would follow it with, at the very bottom, this allows you to be free. That's Beautiful. Probably what I would say. My favorite item under $100 that I use.
That saying fits this podcast beautifully. I love that answer, by the way.
Man.
Yeah, take your time. We're not in any rush. This one takes a little thought. It's not as easy as everyone thinks.
No, and I typically have expensive taste, so I don't know if I have a lot of stuff.
That's why you can't say your phone. You can't
under $100.
And maybe if it relates to something that you like, you specifically, or like what you do day to day lifestyle, whatever, or maybe something to do with public speaking or your coaching platform, or
yeah, no. I want to give a good answer here because I think it's powerful. So it's a newer product, and I've been using it every day since I've owned it for about the last month. And so I think that is what I'll speak to. I don't know exactly what it costs, but I know it's under 100. Cool. I recently got a Bluetooth sleep mask, and it allows me to block out the world, and it's padded, so it's not like right on my eyes. It actually removes it and lifts it from my face. But it completely blacks out everything, which I sleep better when it's totally dark. If there's any kind of like deal, we've got dogs and kids and all that stuff. And so the other thing is that I found is I was wearing different headphones when I would go to sleep sometimes, pretty frequently. And I would listen to some sort of like meditation music to wind myself down at the end of the night for like 30 minutes beforehand. And I was like wearing headphones, and they were what they were. And so my wife ended up getting me this about a month ago, and it's been a game changer because I literally can have really, really low volume because it's like right here. I can still hear my wife because the speakers are really tiny and they're flat. So I can still lay on my side because I'm a side sleeper. And then it blocks out all the light. So I get really high quality sleep. So that's probably the one I use every day.
That's a great answer. That's fantastic. And we're definitely gonna have a link to the show notes for that product because I want to go get some of those for myself.
But I'm a gadget guy. Like, man, I've got stuff for everything, right? Like, so that's why that was so hard for me to answer. So
that's a beautiful answer. I think that's perfect. That's a great note to end on because I'm such a big believer in getting good sleep and that evening routine, morning routine. That's a huge aspect for me and for this show. So, Brian, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to spend with you, get to know you a little bit better. And like I said, we've got so much more that I really want to dive into you. I really look forward to the opportunity for us to get together again.
Let's do it, man. Let's set up a part 2. Let's make it happen. I think that'd be great. That'd be fun. Right. And thank you for creating this platform to put good into the world, brother.
Thank you. All right, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Oh, I'm about to hit leave meeting instead of let me